Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today I want to talk about how to survive a midlife crisis in your 40s. According to a national survey carried out in the US, roughly 26% of participants said that they had experienced a midlife crisis, and the most common age for it was between 38 and 50. So that's a pretty big statistic, and I suspect that there's a lot more people out there that are struggling with an existential crisis around about that age. So in this video I want to talk about what a midlife crisis is, and also want to offer you a radically different perspective that hopefully can make a real big difference if you're struggling with this. Hi, I'm Stephen Burns from Mind School, and today I want to talk about how to survive a midlife crisis if you're in your 40s. The famous writer Victor Hugo once said that 40 is the age of youth, but 50 is the youth of old age. Very poetic, but mildly depressing. Thank you very much for that, Victor Hugo. But this can definitely be a bit of a funny age. I remember a couple of weeks ago I was talking to a friend. I was out for a few beers, and he kind of just dropped it into the conversation. He said, "Do you have any advice for someone who's going through a midlife crisis?" And then after a few moments I realised he was actually talking about himself. And it took him a lot of courage to build up to asking me about that, I could see. So I think this is a big issue for quite a lot of people, especially when we reach that kind of funny age when we're in our 40s. So what actually is a midlife crisis? Well, it's where we reach a point in our life where we become acutely aware of our mortality, and we start to question whether or not we're living a worthwhile, fulfilling and happy existence. And I totally get this. I'm in my 40s now, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, I genuinely believed that life was endless. Old age was something that happened to other people. And when I get to like 70, 80 or 90, science will have cured old age anyway. They'll have invented a pill that you just take and get an extra 40 or 50 years of life. But then when I reached 40, that very much changed. All of a sudden I started to realise where this was heading. I became acutely aware of my mortality, and I started to question my own life and get a real clarification of my values. I started to look at my life in a different way, change my lifestyle and habits, and I just appreciated just how finite time can be. This really is not a trial run at the end of the day. So I do think this can be quite a sensitive time, and it can bring up a lot of stuff for a lot of people. But the main thing I want to talk about in this video is I want to offer you a radical new perspective on a midlife crisis. And hopefully this new perspective will help you navigate these existential troubles that you may be experiencing right now. So the radical new perspective is this, and that is that a midlife crisis actually isn't a problem at all. It's an awakening. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of a cheesy Instagram quote, so let me just explain, let me unpack that a little bit more. A lot of people, when they're experiencing a midlife crisis, they think it's like some sort of horrendous, period of their life that they have to get past, or they have to just suppress, or, just not have at all. Like it's some sort of, horrible disease that they contract in their 40s, and they just kind of hope that they don't succumb to it. But when you look a little bit closer, that's actually not what's going on at all. It's actually a calling, it's an awakening, it's an example of self-awareness. Because if you think about it, if you weren't aware acutely of your mortality, then you wouldn't be aware of how precious life is. As I said previously, time isn't infinite. We only have a finite amount of time on, the planet. Our life is not something that's going to be endless. So it is important that we do live it to the best of our capabilities, that we do enjoy as many moments as we possibly can, spend our time wisely, and do the things that we enjoy, do the things that bring us happiness, that bring us love, that bring us fulfillment. And also, I think it's really important, a really good thing, that we question whether we are living a happy and fulfilling life or not. I think that's a really, really good thing, because if you didn't, then you could well be sleepwalking your way to disaster. You could end up in your 70s, 80s or 90s, and all of a sudden you can look back and realise that you've not lived life in accordance to the things that you want to do. You've not lived life to your values and done the things that deep down you really wanted to do. I remember a while back I had a conversation with an old timer, a guy in his 80s, and he was in an old folks home at the time, and he loved to reminisce, he loved to look back across his life and talk about the things that he'd done, the interesting people that he'd met. And one of the questions I had for him was, as he looked back across his life, did he have any regrets? And interestingly enough, he said that he didn't have any regrets for the things that he had done, but he did have regrets for the things that he hadn't done. That he hadn't spent anywhere near enough time earlier on in his life asking uncomfortable, provocative questions and really clarifying the things that were deeply important to him. The aspects of life that he really wanted to spend his time on. That he'd spent too much time on absolute bullshit, on stuff that didn't really matter. And for me, I kind of love this story. It kind of stayed with me because I think it's more of a warning, but it can also be really, really useful. So in terms of something practical, if you're going through a midlife crisis right now, if you're having some sort of existential troubles, then I'd recommend that don't see this as a bad thing. See this actually as a good thing. See it as an example of, self-awareness. It's an awakening. It's a calling. It's a part of you that wants you to pay attention to your life and wants you to potentially change the way that you live your life and do things in a different way and spend it on the things that really, really do matter. It's an opportunity to re-clarify the things that are most important to you. And the second thing I'd recommend might sound a little bit counterintuitive, and that is to actually lean into the crisis a little bit. Rather than try to avoid it, to run away from it, or to suppress it, actually just lean into it a little bit and take it a little bit further. And one little technique I'd recommend you try is something I call the end of life strategy. And this is where you imagine going off to the very end of your life in your mind's eye, in your imagination, and you imagine when you're like 80 or 90 years old and you're at the very end of your life and you're looking back and you're just wondering if you've had any regrets, similar to what the old guy did in the old folks home. And if you were to change anything, what would you change? Tony Robbins, the famous motivational speaker, often calls this a rocking chair moment. When you're in your rocking chair, you're kind of old and decrepit, and you're looking back in your life, and you're just having a think about the things that you would change and the way that you would have spent your time a little bit more differently. And then, of course, any insights you get from this technique, you do want to act on them. You want to make changes in your life. You want to make sure that you do use it as a calling, as an awakening, so that you can live a life that's more happy, more fulfilled, and more satisfying to you. So that's my thoughts on how to navigate a midlife crisis when you're in your 40s. What do you think? Any more suggestions? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? Let me know in the comments. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you later on.